I came home from a 2-month job to find my workshop, and everything in it gone. Bulldozed, erased, no warning, no apology. Just a smug note from the HOA and a neighbor whispering one name. Karen. That was the moment I stopped being a builder and became a wrecking ball. I got back late Thursday evening, bone-tired and road-grimy after spending almost 2 months working a construction site in the Nevada desert. I pulled into my driveway in the outskirts of Tucson, half expecting to see my dog Bolt bounding out from the backyard, the warm porch light casting that familiar orange glow across the gravel. Instead, I was met with a strange, hollow emptiness. The yard looked off, like someone had rearranged my life while I was gone. At first, I couldn't quite place it. I killed the engine and stepped out, rolling the stiffness out of my shoulders. The air was cooler than I remembered, quiet, unnervingly quiet. My eyes scanned across my backyard. Then it hit me. The workshop was gone. I stood frozen for a solid 5 seconds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The building I had spent 3 years designing and building with my own 2 hands, the one I'd poured over $50,000 into, not to mention my sweat, blood, and a fractured thumb, was simply not there. Just a bare concrete pad with a few torn bolts and splintered wood shrapnel sticking out like broken bones. I rushed around the side of the house, heart hammering now. The storage shed was also missing, not damaged, not moved. Gone. In its place was a strip of churned dirt and tire tracks, as if someone had dragged it into the abyss. My tools, my lumber, my welding rig, my lathe, my generator, all gone. Jesus Christ, I muttered, spinning in circles like the answer might be hiding behind a bush. My neighbor Dave emerged from his back porch holding a beer like he was watching a baseball game. "Tom, you're back?" he called. "Yeah, I'm back," I said, probably sounding a little more hostile than intended. "Where the hell is my workshop?" Dave raised both hands like I was about to punch him. "Hey man, don't shoot the messenger. It was that HOA lady. Karen, I think her name is. She brought in a crew a couple weeks ago, big yellow cat dozer and everything. Said the structures were a violation." My jaw fell open. "Violation of what? I'm not in the damn HOA." Dave shrugged helplessly. "I told her that. Told her you built those legally too. But she said the HOA board voted to include your parcel into the extended preservation zone. Said she had authority to remove unapproved constructions." I stood in silence, stunned. Dave walked over and handed me a folded paper. "They tacked this to your gate the morning of. Figured you should keep it." It was a printed notice from the Northridge Community Enhancement Committee, with a letterhead that looked like it was made on Microsoft Word 97. Something about unauthorized permanent structures, visual disruption of community aesthetic, and removal scheduled for Tuesday at 0900 hours. It was dated nearly a week ago. No envelope, no delivery confirmation, just a passive-aggressive hit job disguised as a form letter. I called the police. While I waited, I walked the perimeter of the backyard, taking pictures of everything. The gouged-up concrete, the twisted rebar, the broken fence panels left by the demolition crew. Bolt's doghouse had been crushed and pushed to the side, like someone had kicked his life out of the way. My hands shook as I took the photos, not from fear, pure shaking rage. When the officers arrived, I showed them the paper and the damage. One of them, Officer Reynolds, whistled low. "They really went to town on this. You sure you're not part of an HOA?" I almost laughed. I bought this place on specifically to avoid that kind of garbage. I've got my deed inside. There's no HOA covenant, no easements, no architectural committee, nothing. The officers nodded and took notes, but their faces had that polite neutrality that said, We're not touching this without a court order. They gave me a report number and advised I speak to a lawyer. As they were leaving, a white SUV rolled up to the curb. The window came down and there she was, Karen herself. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, pursed lips like she just bit into a lemon made of smugness. "Ah, Tom, welcome back," she said with a brightness so fake it stung. "I assume you saw the improvements. The HOA has been very busy." "Improvements?" I barked, walking toward her car. "You bulldozed my property." Karen didn't blink. "Those buildings were eyesores, and as of last month your parcel is officially under the jurisdiction of Northridge HOA. It was unanimously voted in." "Bullshit," I snapped. "That's not how this works. You can't just vote someone into a goddamn homeowners association." "Oh, Tom," she said, almost pitying. "You should really read the new zoning memo. We've expanded our boundaries for community cohesion. You'll find it's all perfectly legal." And with that, she rolled up her window and drove off, like she hadn't just admitted to felony trespass with the confidence of a televangelist asking for donations. I stood there, fists clenched, staring after her car until the taillights disappeared. My masterwork was gone. My equipment, my blueprints, my sanctuary, ripped out of the earth without so much as a phone call. And she thought that was the end of it. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The next morning, I was on the phone with my lawyer before I'd even had coffee. Karen had woken up and chosen war, but I was more than ready to return the favor, legally. I'd hired Dan Wexler a few years back when I had a zoning dispute about a drainage easement. He was sharp, methodical, and most importantly, absolutely ruthless when he smelled blood. After hearing what happened, Dan let out a low whistle. "Tom, that's not just trespassing, that's destruction of private property. And if she contracted a demolition crew under false authority, that's fraud, maybe even criminal conspiracy." "Good," I said, staring at the empty slab in my backyard. "Let's burn her to the goddamn ground, legally." Dan asked me to gather every document I had: deed, survey maps, construction permits, emails from the city, even the blueprints I'd filed with the county when I built the workshop. I drove downtown and picked up certified copies of everything. My property had always been outside the HOA boundaries, always. I made damn sure of that when I bought it. Meanwhile, I started calling around to figure out which demolition company Karen had used. After some digging and a very tense conversation with a guy named Mitch at Desert Edge Contracting, I got a name: Ridgeview Demolition Services. They confirmed they'd been hired by a Mrs. Karen Welling representing Northridge HOA, and that they were told my structures were abandoned and unauthorized. "She gave us paperwork," the guy said defensively when I pressed him. "Said the structures violated local code, even showed us some permit-looking things." "Did you check ownership?" I asked. "Look, buddy, we just knock down what people pay us to knock down. We're not lawyers." "You're damn right you're not," I said, hanging up. Later that day, I tried calling the HOA office directly. No answer. I left a voicemail. 5 minutes later, I got an email. "All communications must go through our legal counsel." Translation: they knew they screwed up, but they weren't just going to back off. No, they doubled down. That night, a second letter was hand-delivered to my mailbox. New letterhead, new phrasing. It now claimed that my property had been annexed into the HOA through a resolution ratified by the majority of voting members, citing some obscure clause in their bylaws about adjacent parcels with compatible zoning. They claimed this vote occurred while I was out of state, conveniently while I couldn't object. They also included a friendly reminder that I now owed $600 in annual HOA dues plus a one-time architectural compliance fee of $250. I laughed so hard I nearly pulled a muscle. The gall of these people was truly Olympic level. But the more I thought about it, the less funny it became. Because this wasn't just about Karen's ego. This was a strategic land grab. If they could claim my land as part of their expanded boundary, they could force me into compliance with their rules, push me to demolish or modify anything that didn't fit their vision. And in my case, they'd already decided to fast-track that process with a bulldozer. I started documenting everything: photos, video, screenshots of emails. I mounted new security cameras around the property, motion sensors, floodlights. If Karen or anyone from her clown council set foot on my soil again, they'd be on camera in 4K. While digging through the HOA's online documents, I had to use a neighbor's login. I stumbled on something interesting: a PDF from a recent community meeting that listed long-term development priorities. Item number 5, creation of community green space along southern border. The southern border was me, my land, my goddamn backyard. They were planning to turn my property into a park. And then things got worse. My mailbox was egged, my recycling bin knocked over. My truck had a smear of mustard on the windshield one morning. At first, I thought it might just be random vandalism, but then I saw the post on Nextdoor. Some people don't want to be part of the community. Maybe they should live somewhere else. No name, but I didn't need one. Even Dave told me Karen was making her rounds again, telling neighbors I was unstable, possibly hoarding chemicals, and that my workshop was a hazard. She was painting me like some kind of backyard Unabomber. So I did what any sane man would do. I rented a billboard, right at the edge of Northridge, where everyone entering the subdivision could see it. My land is not part of Northridge HOA. My buildings were destroyed illegally. I'm taking this to court. Ask your board where your dues are going. I signed it with my name and address. Nothing subtle about it. By the next morning, I had 4 news outlets in my inbox and a reporter on my front lawn. If they thought I'd quietly take the hit and move on, they were about to learn just how noisy I could get. By the time week 2 rolled around, I had enough evidence to fill a damn library. Emails, documents, pictures, statements from contractors, even blurry screenshots from Karen's painfully outdated HOA Zoom meetings. Dan, my attorney, was building the case like it was a siege tower. But while we were prepping for a civil war, Karen decided it was time to light the first cannon. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of replacing one of my back fence panels when a county cruiser rolled up and parked half in my driveway. 2 deputies got out, hands on their hips like they expected to find me gutting deer on the porch. "Afternoon," the taller one said. "We've received a complaint from Northridge HOA regarding unpermitted land use, hazardous materials, and possible zoning violations." I stared at him. "Excuse me?" He pulled out a printed report. "They claim you've constructed unauthorized facilities and are storing volatile materials in an unsafe environment." My laugh came out sharp and mean. "Let me guess. Karen sent you." "We're just here to verify," he said. So I invited them in. We walked the yard. I showed them the now empty concrete pad, the crushed gravel where my shed used to stand, the inventory of what used to be stored there. Nothing remained but some charred rebar and a stack of pavers I hadn't gotten around to installing. I opened the garage, too. No fuel drums, no meth lab, just shelves of Home Depot buckets, a mower, and an unopened bottle of motor oil. One of the deputies actually looked disappointed. After 30 minutes, they wrapped up. "No code violations we can see," the shorter one said, flipping his notebook shut. "We'll file a no-action report." Before leaving, the taller deputy gave me a look that suggested this wasn't his first HOA wild goose chase. "You might want to keep an eye on her," he said quietly. "This one smells personal." No shit. That night I started doing something I hadn't done since college. I kept a journal, Every knock at the door, every car that slowed by my house, every weird noise in the middle of the night. Karen wasn't just pushing legal boundaries, she was trying to wear me down, break me, smear me into the pavement until I either sold or cracked. But she didn't know me. I built custom homes for a living. I once spent 4 weeks sleeping in a tent while digging septic trenches in monsoon season. I don't crack, I reinforce. The day after the deputies left, I went to the city zoning office and pulled public records on Northridge's boundary expansions over the last 5 years. Guess what? Not a single legal annexation had been filed, not one. Their so-called boundary adjustment didn't exist in any municipal register. It was just a PowerPoint slide presented at a meeting and rubber-stamped by Karen's lapdogs on the board. That afternoon, I sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA via Dan. Included with it was a formal request for their financial reports, meeting minutes, and voting records regarding the expansion. Dan cited the Arizona Open HOA Governance Act. Legally, they had to comply within 10 business days. Karen replied with a single line. "We do not recognize Mr. Baker's standing to make such a request." Which was hysterical, considering they just claimed I was part of their precious HOA. The real kicker came the following Friday. A thick envelope arrived via courier. Inside was a glossy, full-color HOA newsletter titled Northridge Rising. On the cover was a smiling photo of Karen next to the headline, "Beautification Project Begins." The article detailed how community improvements had already begun with the removal of hazardous and unsightly constructions along the southern edge of the neighborhood. She was bragging about bulldozing my shop like it was a heroic act, as if she'd slain some architectural dragon. She even had the audacity to quote herself, "It's never easy making the tough decisions, but the board stands united in improving our shared space for future generations." I nearly tore the damn thing in half. Instead, I scanned it, sent it to Dan, and then started making calls. By Monday morning, I had a land surveyor on my property. By Tuesday, I had a drone operator capturing aerial photos. By Wednesday, I'd scheduled a meeting with the local press. And on Thursday, I filed the lawsuit. The first one: civil trespass, destruction of property, harassment, defamation, attempted forced annexation. We were asking for $1,200,000 in damages, property loss, equipment, legal fees, emotional distress, and punitive compensation for HOA misconduct. We served the papers directly to the HOA office during their Thursday meeting. Karen wasn't there, but the look on the faces of her board, that was priceless. The following evening, Dave knocked on my door holding a beer and a sheepish expression. Tom, thought you should know. Karen's going door to door saying you're suing the HOA to bankrupt the whole community. Says you want to steal public land and privatize it, whatever that means." I just smiled and sipped my own beer. Let her spin whatever fantasy she wanted. The truth was in the filings, and soon it'd be in the courtroom. The courtroom was one of those older county buildings with yellowed walls and flickering fluorescence that made everything feel like a scene from a forgotten cop show. But when I walked in with Dan by my side and a full binder of exhibits tucked under my arm, I felt more focused than I had in weeks. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about pulling the mask off Karen's HOA circus and showing everyone exactly what was crawling underneath. At the preliminary hearing, Karen's lawyer, a slick-haired guy named Gregory Lance who looked like he slept in his suit, walked in late and smug, carrying nothing but a legal pad and too much confidence. He opened with a motion to dismiss, claiming my case had no standing because I was a recognized member of the HOA, subject to its bylaws and jurisdiction. I damn near laughed out loud. Dan calmly presented the deed, the zoning maps, and copies of the municipal records clearly showing my property had never been, and still wasn't, under HOA authority. He walked the judge through the timeline of the supposed annexation and the lack of any legal registration with the county. Then, for good measure, he played a clip of Karen's own video presentation from a HOA Zoom meeting where she declared, "Once we get that eyesore cleared out, we'll finally have a continuous greenbelt on the south side. It'll raise everyone's property value." The judge frowned. Hard. Mr. Lance tried to recover by waving around a set of printed documents that looked like they'd been dragged out of a filing cabinet from 1995. "Your Honor, this is the revised community map ratified by HOA vote. It clearly shows Mr. Baker's parcel as part of the district." The judge leaned forward, squinting. "Is that map signed or filed with the city?" "Well, not exactly." "Denied. Mr. Baker's property rights are clearly separate. The HOA's actions here may constitute serious overreach." You could hear a pin drop. On my end, I scribbled a note. That's one for the scoreboard. But things really started heating up after the hearing. Later that week, I got a call from a man named Carl Brinson. I'd never heard of him, but he said he was a retired accountant, and more importantly, he was the former treasurer of Northridge HOA. "I saw your billboard," he said. "Took guts. I figured it was time someone stood up to her." He told me he'd served on the board for 3 years before resigning when Karen went rogue. According to him, she began bypassing proper votes, authorizing spending without consensus, and cutting corners like it was an Olympic sport. "The problem is," Carl said, "everyone else on the board either doesn't know better or is too scared to stand up to her. But I still have some of the old books, if you want them." I met him the next morning at a diner off I-10. He handed me a dusty accordion folder filled with printouts, bank statements, meeting transcripts, and something golden. A copy of a payment authorization signed solely by Karen, allocating $20,000 for demolition services related to property beautification. No board approval, no signatures, just hers. We added it to the case file immediately. Dan filed a motion for discovery and requested the HOA's full financial reports for the past 2 fiscal years. Predictably, Karen resisted, claiming the documents were proprietary, but the court ordered compliance within 10 days. Meanwhile, I filed a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA or any of its representatives from setting foot on my property or issuing further fines, threats, or communications outside of legal counsel. The judge approved it the next day. It was a small but satisfying win. No more bullshit letters, no more surprise visitors with clipboards and fake authority. But even better, the press had started to smell blood. A local reporter named Melissa Quinn reached out for a follow-up to my billboard stunt. I agreed, but on one condition. We go live. She brought a cameraman and met me on the remains of my workshop slab. I told the story in full, calm, measured, backed up with photos, legal filings, and a copy of the cease and desist letter. By the time the segment aired, it had gone viral. Comments flooded in. HOA horror stories, support, memes about Karen with devil horns. My favorite, a gif of a bulldozer labeled Northridge HOA running over a Lego house with the caption, "Fixing the Neighborhood." But the cherry on top? An anonymous envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address, just a USB drive inside. On it was a screen recording of a private Zoom meeting among HOA board members. Karen was leading, of course. She said, word for word, "Once we bankrupt Baker or force him out, we can rezone that corner lot and develop it into a walking trail. The greenbelt needs to be continuous, and his ego is the only thing in the way." I watched it 3 times. Then I emailed it to Dan. The game had changed. If Karen thought she still had the upper hand, she was about to find out what it felt like to stand under a legal wrecking ball with her name on it. After we got the USB recording, Dan went nuclear. He filed an amended complaint expanding the scope of the lawsuit. Not just civil damages, but now including intentional fraud, abuse of authority, and conspiracy to devalue private property for institutional gain. The real kicker? We were attaching the HOA board as co-defendants, since they either participated or willfully ignored Karen's actions. But that was just the start. One of Dan's interns flagged something odd in the invoices from the demolition crew. There were two payments. One was the official $20,000 signed by Karen, but the second? A $10,000 wire transfer from a private account belonging to a company called Sunfield Urban Design. Sounded fancy, looked suspicious. With some digging, we found out that Sunfield Urban Design belonged to Robert Welling, Karen's husband. Suddenly, everything clicked. This wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president bulldozing sheds to feel important. This was a coordinated land acquisition scheme. Karen pushed people out. Robert's firm designed greenbelts and community assets on the cleared land. And HOA funds got funneled to private projects that just so happened to benefit them both. Dan looked up from the file and said, deadpan, "They're running a suburban Ponzi scheme with lawn edging and fake smiles." We filed a second lawsuit within 72 hours. This time it was against Ridgeview Demolition Services for unlawful destruction of private property. And here's the big one. Against the Municipal Planning Office for issuing a fraudulent demolition permit signed by a city inspector who, as it turned out, hadn't worked for the city in over a year. I know. Dan got on the phone with a contact in the State Inspector General's office. Within 2 days, we had an open investigation into corruption inside the city zoning department. Karen unknowingly had dragged City Hall into the mud with her. It didn't take long for everything to start unraveling. An HOA board member, Megan, a mild-mannered woman who had once complimented my Christmas lights, resigned abruptly. She called me 2 nights later, whispering like she was in a spy movie. "I didn't know," she said. "She told us your property was abandoned, that you were some kind of squatter. She showed us a fake title transfer with your name blacked out. I swear, Tom, she lied to all of us." "Did she email that document?" "Yes, I have it. Want it?" I could have kissed her through the phone. The document was a PDF attachment Karen had sent to the board, labeled Parcel 48 Transfer Pre-Approval. Inside was a low-res scan of a quitclaim deed, completely fake, claiming I had relinquished ownership of my land for future community use. My name was replaced with placeholder text, and the signature was a laughable forgery. Dan called it the legal equivalent of a toddler with a crayon pretending to be Picasso. We added forgery, fraud, and identity misrepresentation to our existing case. The civil complaint was now thicker than a phone book. Karen went from HOA president to prime suspect in what looked dangerously close to racketeering. Then came the media storm. Melissa Quinn from Channel 7 released an in-depth exposé, complete with a timeline, drone footage, interviews, and a copy of the demolition footage overlaid with Karen's Greenbelt presentation. Local papers picked it up. Reddit got involved. I saw a meme that had Karen's face on the Death Star with my workshop as Alderaan. By the time I walked into the next hearing, people in the gallery actually clapped. Karen didn't show. Her attorney did. But even he looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. He submitted a brief denying all allegations, blaming the demolition on miscommunication and overzealous interpretation of internal jurisdiction. The judge wasn't buying it. He ordered a full financial audit of HOA accounts and scheduled depositions for every board member, contractor, and municipal contact involved. The dominoes were lined up. All it would take was one push. The fallout hit like a wrecking ball wrapped in subpoenas. After the judge ordered depositions, the HOA board members started folding faster than cheap lawn chairs in a monsoon. 3 of them submitted written statements claiming they'd been misled by President Welling, that they had no idea the demolition was unauthorized, and that they never reviewed financial authorizations in detail. In other words, they were bailing out of Karen's sinking yacht before the hull split in half. And it was splitting fast. The city's internal investigation confirmed what we already suspected. The demolition permit that Ridgeview Demolition had relied on was forged. The inspector whose signature was on it had retired over a year ago. Worse, the city had no record of any permit request for my address in the last 5 years. The zoning office claimed the clerical oversight was being addressed, which is municipal speak for, "We're lawyering up before the feds arrive." Dan filed an emergency injunction against further HOA spending, arguing that community funds were being misused for personal gain. The judge approved it. Karen's power, both real and imagined, was starting to evaporate. And then, just when I thought she might slither away into hiding, Karen went fully nuclear. She filed a counter lawsuit against me. Not just a petty claim either. She accused me of defamation, harassment, targeted threats against community members, and deliberate interference with the peaceful functioning of the HOA. The whole thing was a theater of absurdity. She included screenshots of me pointing at her SUV during one of our driveway confrontations, a clipped quote from my live news interview, "I won't be bullied out of my land," and even a picture of the billboard as evidence of public shaming. I half expected her to cite emotional damage from exposure to direct sunlight. Dan laughed so hard he had to take off his glasses. Still, we took it seriously. You don't dance around a rattlesnake unless you're ready to stomp. At the hearing for the countersuit, Karen finally showed her face again. She walked in wearing a stiff blazer and a smug expression like she'd just invented HOA governance. Her lawyer delivered a dramatic monologue about the irreparable harm done to a woman trying to preserve community values. I'm pretty sure even the court reporter rolled her eyes. Then Dan stood. He calmly introduced the video recording from the USB, the one where Karen said, and I quote, "Once we bankrupt Baker or force him out, we can rezone that corner lot." The judge didn't say a word for a full 10 seconds, then, "Play it again." We did. Karen's expression cracked like drywall under pressure. Dan followed it with the forged quitclaim deed, the demolition invoices, the under-the-table payments, the old HOA treasurer's testimony. Even the drone footage of the Greenbelt expansion plans, designed by her husband's company, the same firm receiving city beautification grants. It was a parade of evidence that didn't just show mismanagement. It painted Karen as the mastermind of a shady operation that was collapsing in real time. The judge tossed her countersuit like it was on fire. "This is retaliatory litigation. Frankly, I'm astonished you're not under criminal investigation, yet." Yet. That word hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Within 48 hours, the story broke statewide. HOA president faces fraud allegations in land grab scheme was on every local news site. A podcast picked it up. Reddit exploded again. Someone even made a parody ad for Karen's community cleansing service, complete with bulldozer sound effects and her voice saying, "We clear the clutter and your rights." The final cherry? A letter from the Arizona State Attorney General's office confirmed they were opening a formal investigation into the Northridge HOA and its officers. Citing potential violations of state housing and zoning laws, misuse of municipal resources, and coordinated fraud. Karen vanished. Her SUV disappeared from the driveway. Her house went dark. According to Dave, a moving van showed up at 6 in the morning and was gone by 8. She didn't even say goodbye. By the end of the week, her husband's firm had scrubbed all references to Northridge from their website, and the HOA had called for an emergency meeting to elect new leadership, under court supervision. And me? I stood in my backyard on Friday evening, sipping a cold beer while the sun dropped low behind the mountains, casting orange light across the bare concrete slab where my workshop had once stood. I smiled, because I was already drafting plans for the new one, bigger, stronger, with steel reinforcements. 3 months later, I walked out of the courtroom with the final judgment in hand. $1,200,000 in damages awarded, with potential for additional restitution pending the results of the state's investigation into fraudulent HOA operations. It felt less like victory and more like justice finally catching up with arrogance. The courtroom had been silent when the judge read the decision. Karen never showed up. Her attorney withdrew 2 weeks prior, citing irreconcilable ethical differences. That's legalese for, "I'm not going down with this lunatic." Last I heard, she and her husband had moved out of state, somewhere with no extradition treaties for suburban HOA crimes, I assumed. The HOA board was dissolved. A state-appointed oversight committee took control, and a forensic accountant was hired to trace where all the community funds had gone. Spoiler: a lot of it was spent on consulting fees to Sunfield Urban Design. Several of my neighbors reached out to apologize. Megan brought over a pie and said, "I knew Karen was intense, but I didn't know she was laundering your entire damn property." I accepted her apology and the pie. But my favorite moment came at the next community gathering. Yes, I went, not out of obligation, but because they asked me to speak. The HOA's replacement committee, now operating under the watchful eye of the state, wanted to issue a formal apology and announce new transparency measures. The irony of being invited as a guest of honor by the same group that once called me a threat to neighborhood harmony wasn't lost on me. I stood at the little gazebo in the park where Karen once posed for newsletter photos and cleared my throat. "Thanks," I said. "It's good to see Northridge becoming a place where neighbors talk to each other instead of about each other." Applause. Real, not polite. I didn't say much else, just handed over copies of my new workshop plans to a few folks who'd asked and invited them over for barbecue once construction was finished. No HOA approval required. A few weeks later, I was out in the yard welding frame braces for the new building when Dave wandered over with a cooler of beer and an oversized grin. "Hey," he said. "You know what they're calling you on Nextdoor now?" I braced myself. "What?" He popped the top on a bottle. "The hammer of HOA." I laughed so hard I dropped my wrench. The new workshop went up faster than I expected. Bigger footprint, reinforced steel beams. Solar-powered with a full ventilation system and even a loft office space for blueprints and cold drinks. Bolt got a brand new doghouse too, one that looked like a tiny log cabin with a wraparound porch. He'd earned it. And yeah, I had security cameras, but I also had something better. Respect, not just from neighbors or the state or even the court, from myself. Because I hadn't let them bulldoze me along with my workshop. I'd stood my ground, and I'd built something stronger in its place.